Now in this lesson, we want to talk about painting winter colors. You have colors in all the seasons, and they're fairly distinctive between spring and fall, winter and summer. And winter is more muted, cooler colors. You still have, like in this painting by John Carlson, you still have oranges, reds, maybe, yellows, colors that you have in the autumn, but they're a little bit cooler, a little more subdued than in the autumn. And of course, we think of white when we think of winter colors because of snow, but don't think of white as much as in the shadow of the snow we have blues, blue-violet, violet, and then in the sunlit area of the snows we have real pale yellows, oranges, yellow greens, even a lot of color in the sunlit snow. So it's not just white, it's those violets and real pale warm colors to suggest the light. But a lot of violets, a lot of red, blue-violet, blue-greens, cooler colors, and things are more muted in the winter. As you can see here, there's not much strong colors. You've got a little bit of strong red there, some strong greens, but everything is fairly muted. He does pop some of these blue. He used a phthalo blue or a Prussian blue, which looks a lot different than ultramarine, although he did have ultramarine also. So a little bit different look to some of his blues because he does have that equivalent of phthalo blue. So we want to think in terms of those colors. I'm saying we have cool violets, cool greens, red violet. That doesn't mean you can't have a lot of yellows and oranges, but they're going to be cooler in the winter than they are in the summer or in the autumn or even springtime. So a little more muted. It's a bit more atmospheric in the winter, of course, unless you're in the Southwest, but anywhere else you're going to have a lot more humidity in the winter, and you can see the haze from the sky to the mountains. Very atmospheric because, again, that kind of heavy moisture in the winter a lot of the times. So I'm going to be looking at some winter paintings and some of the photographs. But compositionally, and you'll see this with all of Carlson's landscapes, they're very carefully designed. You can always follow. And these lines that you follow, you never see a lot of just lines straight across. They're always going to be angled. And you say, well, what if I come up on a scene that has a lot of straight across lines? Am I supposed to change them? Well, the better answer might be maybe you just don't paint that scene. Look for scenes that kind of create better compositions, or you can add to them and create better compositions. But he's carefully designed these. Your eye follows the shadow in here or follows the straight line of the trees in there, and it can just wind around, follow a lot of different angles, lines back in here. It just kind of leads you all over the place. You never, even though there is a fairly straight line here, it stops with this tree. And it leads you up and back here to these lines. So you can enter a couple of different places in this painting down in here, follow these lines, and you can really kind of roll all over. And again, I don't mean that when people look at paintings, they're always real conscious of, okay, I'm entering the painting at the bottom. Now I need to find something that's going to lead my eye. But when you look at a painting, it's a lot easier to look at when your eye can travel, on these lines and edges of big shapes. They just kind of pull your eye around. And, there's some changes I'm sure he made here. The scene might not have been just like this. The shadow here he might have added to hit the tree, to hit this tree, to hit these lines. He might have adjusted things slightly, but it picked a subject matter that's workable. It has, a lot of these varied shapes, and none of them are very straight. They're all very half-rounded, really do a lot to show form. Let's look at a photograph. A lot of the winter also with the trees, especially the bare branches, it can get kind of confusing. We look at something like this and it just looks kind of messy. Or in here, you look at it and you think, well, I see a little light, I see some dark, halftone. It looks like a big jumbled mess. But what you have to do is sort that out and force everything into a dark or a light to start with. You can add subtlety later. But I always look right away where the light's coming from, and the light is fairly low. This is up in the mountains of Tucson where they do get snow. It's fairly low and it's coming from the left side. So I want to see this tree in shadow. And I basically want to start with seeing these trees in shadow also. And I got a tree in sunlight right there. So shadow, sunlight, shadow. Now there's a few lights in here I'll add. But you have to make a decision. This large shape, I have to put it in either a dark or light value. And I'm seeing mostly shadow there. So what I want to do there, if I start with the dark here, that's an obvious dark. Make that a dark. I'm ignoring the snow to start with, ignoring all these little lights that are in there, and just go with the dark shape. And I want to design a shape on there that reads fairly well. That one's pretty good in there already. Then I want to go to the background. Now I've added the light, but I start with this value right here. That's a dark. Then on top of that, I've added some light. This is probably the best way to show the light coming this way. If I start dabbing in different little darks and lights all over, I'm going to lose that shape as fitting into the composition and fitting into trying to suggest the light. Again, getting it a bit more, it's fairly complicated and simplifying. Then going to the background, I want to do the same thing. It's got sunlight here at the bare trees, and then bare tree shadow. And I'm forcing everything into real simple shapes and values. So a lot of clutter, simplify it. And then continue on. I'm adding the darker greens there, putting them in shadow. And sometimes it's just a decision. You look at the tree back in here and you think, well, is it sunlight, shadow? Probably mostly sunlight, but I want it dark, so I put it in shadow because I want these light background hills to stick out. And then lastly, we'll stick them at the background first, hit those mountains back in there that are a pale orange because they're catching the light. Now they might have a bit of violet back in here, right in there and here, only because I can't use just straight white and orange necessarily because it would be too warm. It would pop out. So a little bit of violet, still looks sunlit, but a little bit of violet to keep it in the background. I don't want it competing with these other warm colors. Also in the foreground, this water, very complicated, a lot of values, but what I want to notice, again, light's coming this way. So all I want to look for is a simple dark and a simple light. You can see the light in here on the water, and the rest is in shadow. I want to keep that very simple. So when I block it in, when I start the painting, I want a simple light, warm blue-violet, and then a darker, cool blue-violet. Now later I can come back and I can add other colors in here, lighter blue, some dark accents, and so on. But I want to establish that dark and light shape on the water. Don't go for subtlety. Don't go for tiny things, subtle value changes, color changes right away. Your block in should look so much simpler than your subject, whether you're using a photograph or painting outside. Then the rocks I just see as two values of dark. You start them out maybe with one value and then add a lighter or darker. But that sets up the shape of those slanted rocks that are on top of the water and the white snow. And the snow is a very simple warm white and a cool muted blue or blue-violet. Now there might be other colors in here, reflected colors. It's in the shadow here on this left side of the bank. But the sunlight can hit stuff on the right side, and that sunlight can bounce in there. And when you look at the photograph, you see it looks a lot lighter. There's even you can see some orange in there, and that's from reflected light. But don't stare at this shadow too much. You're going to make your shadows in the snow way too light. I would rather get them a little darker, because then I have that contrast of this strip of sunlight on top and the shadow there, and it really creates the effect of sunlight shadow. Same thing over here on the right side, shadow, sunlight. And keep it big, simple. But I'm also comparing. The shadow here is a little lighter than the shadow on the trees. It's a little lighter than the shadow on the water. So compare. Don't just isolate an area and try and copy it. Go for an overall value that best suggests the light. So I'm looking for a simplicity like that. Again, more complicated because of the trees, but force simple shape and value. Don't go for subtlety, a lot of halftones. Go for strong, dark, and light. If it was a cloudy day, I'd probably start a bit more dark halftone, light halftone at the darkest darks, and maybe a few lighter lights. But cloudy day doesn't have as many light lights. Sunny day like this does. The light yellow-green, the light hill, light snow, light water, so on. There's more contrast, more extremes on a sunlit day. Now I can spend all the time I want to, after I get my painting blocked in this stage, getting some color variation in these big shapes. But get it this far first. If you're seeing too much subtlety in shapes first, you're going to run into a lot of problems. So quickly here, looking at some other ones, always look compositionally first. And this one has that V shape where the mountains meet here, almost dead center. Doesn't work. So when I look at this, I like some of this area, and I like a lot of this area because of the bare trees against the dark pine trees. That creates a lot of contrast. And of course the pattern of snow, color of the grass here. I also like this roof over here, but I don't like it way over on the side, just running off the canvas. I'd probably place it somewhere in here. So I want to cut down on some of the sky, way too much sky here. And I want to cut off some of the left side and show a lot of the right side. So I will try this and kind of see which shape, whether if it's more of a square or a horizontal. And I've got my trees over here. Again, the bare trees of those aspens and the dark evergreens really create a lot of contrast, as well as the trees and the snow creates a lot of contrast. What I don't like here compositionally is the straight lines of the snow. It just makes your eye run right off there. So I want to try and angle that snow, pull the viewer's eye in there, maybe use some of the taller colored grass also to pull the viewer's eye. I wanted to move that roof. Again, I would get it off center, maybe place it right in here, a little bit of a barn. And I could always get another reference of a barn facing the right direction and put it in there. And then play around with the pattern of snow, because the snow and the dark grass and the dark trees are my greatest contrast, and the viewer's eye can really follow that. So these are the changes here. I put in all the grass, got rid of the snow, and just the viewer's eye now can come in this way, follow that snow, the angle of the shrubbery, the roof line, trees. You can really kind of move the eye all around, and then you want to exit again or exit over here. So create more of a pattern, kind of an entryway with that snow. Again, just to kind of pull your way in that way. And a few spots of snow sticking out in the taller grass and shrubbery also catches the eye, and your eye can follow that. Tried to mess with a little bit different design in the snow back in here. Cut down on some of the snow a little bit, some of the dirt. Careful not to do what I did here. I got too many just right angles. It looks too geometric. These aren't as bad, but I don't want it, because it looks man-made when it gets right angles like that. So I try and stay away from things like that. Obviously, the roof is man-made, so I don't mind having more right angles in a building, but not so with more natural stuff. Everything else I think works great. I like the dark and light back here in the mountains. Simple shadow with a little bit of light streaming in on some tops, but everything in here, the snow, the trees, the rocks, are in shadow. And again, it's comparison. These look real light. The problem would stare at this ground, these grasses, and see them way too light. So when I want to see the value of this, I stare at the tree, see how much lighter it is in the tree, but then how much darker it is in the snow. So really compare so you can get your right value relationships. I think that's the struggle that I think everybody has And that seems to be maybe more what you pick up after messing up so often. I guess what I'm trying to say is that's one of the last mistakes you can kind of jump over is comparing, because so often we don't compare, we just stare and try and match the value. When that becomes second nature, that you're always comparing, then you're starting to understand what you're doing better. And you still make mistakes, but you know how to correct them because you're comparing values rather than just copying. It's that being stuck in that mode of just copying what you're looking at. Isolate, this value here and just mix until you match it. But when I see this ground area and I right away compare it to the snow, then compare it to the trees, I'm going to get a truer value. So again, more of a using that snow to create more angles to pull the viewer in. This one, again, these are all in Colorado, well, except for the Tucson one. This has some nice angles coming in here. Of course, it stops here, but your eye kind of follows along the edge, goes way out here and off the canvas. It does kind of pull you back in, but then it pulls you back out again. So I want to get rid of that. And I'd pull all this grass in the foreground and just recreate the pattern of snow. I would also crop it. I want to get rid of some of this field there. When I look at this, when I was out there, my interest was more in this area. A lot of contrast in there, the big cottonwoods, some over here, but that pattern of dark and light with the snow and the dark green trees and then the strong blue in the background. In the foreground, I just want to pull the viewer's eye back to this area. So first thing here is to get a lot of grass, cover up a lot of that pattern of snow. Same thing over in here. Get rid of some of that large snow that just pulls your eye away from over here. So if I get rid of some of that, it's a lot darker now, more contrast over here. And then snow showing up this way now. I can come through those trees and wind around back in there. And there it's kind of blocked off. So I'm creating a pattern away for the viewer's eye. And then maybe lifting up this one cottonwood or lifting up a couple of them. Break this line here. This line back in here is just a continuous line that goes all the way across. So that cottonwood lifting up breaks that. And compositionally, I can get rid of some of the right side. It's the just left of center that I'm more interested in, and get rid of some of the sky. And I think that makes a better composition. Again, the viewer's eye can pull in here. And that's what's great about winter, is you can use the contrast of the snow against the darker shrubbery and grass and trees and kind of move the viewer's eye around. Same thing here. This road here, this line on the road just cuts off the bottom part. I like everything up in here. I probably wouldn't change anything other than too much sky. The trees, the flat plain, the mountains, they're all too low. So, compositionally, get rid of some of the... And I would play around with the idea of doing maybe a longer horizontal. I could try more of a square. I like the horizontal because of the long mountains, the long shape of the cottonwoods there. And then getting rid of that road and just pulling a lot of these grasses. Again, those winter colors of the red violet, the kind of cool greens and yellows. Could probably add a little bit of this kind of stronger violet around in there. And using the red to pull the eye back, or using some of these lighter yellows against the red to pull the eye back. Could take a little bit of the snow from back in here and create a pattern of snow. Again, it's kind of like putting a road or a path in every painting. You can overdo it, but have the snow kind of coming and going between shrubbery. And that, again, that can pull the viewer's eye back in there. I really like putting the snow between shrubbery and grass and trees. That was a bit too much. But it's a good way to kind of break up the shapes, create some contrast. I'm getting a little picky, but it's easy to kind of get picky with it. It just kind of peers between shrubbery and grasses and kind of breaks up that foreground a bit more.